Hello everybody and welcome back to LMM, and it's now time for another episode of Lawrie Goes Loco. Coming up on the screen now, that will be the links to all of our social media, including our Discord, where you can chat to us about things like trains and model trains and other cool things. Today I'm up in Scotland and I'm going to be looking at another ex-MOD locomotive. Today I'm at Shed 47, which is one of the newer heritage railways in the UK, having been set up in 1997. And why Shed 47 as a name for a railway society, I hear you ask, because many other railways go by something rather valley or lake or light railway, or named after the general area that they're in. And well, that's all because of the building that's behind me, which is Shed 47. You see, this whole complex that I'm on now started life in 1941 as a duplicate stores depot for the Royal Navy over at Rosyth, which is, I don't know, under 10 miles in a kind of that way direction. And Rosyth depot was very important to the Royal Navy, serving the Grand Fleet, which was quite a big and important bit of the Navy. And being in the war, if someone made a move or bombed or destroyed the depot that served it, that would rather hamper the fleet itself. So a duplicate stores, this place was built so that if the first one was damaged in any way, everything could continue as normal. Supplies would get in, repairs could be made, everything would just continue just a bit further down the road. It was a very important strategic reserve. And this place continued with a railway link, well, all the way up until 1993, when it was decommissioned because it wasn't really needed anymore. That said, the railway disappeared over way back in 1971, and things kind of continued just without the railway side of things. Following 1993, the site was basically abandoned, and you had a lot of these very nice and big sheds, which are quite useful for putting larger vehicles in, say, I don't know, buses, which is exactly what happened in 1995. A bus group came together and realised that they could make use of this, and there's something like over 100 buses presently stored in this bus museum here, which works a bit in tandem with the railway here. They're separate organisations, but they work together to provide a really nice visitor experience. The railway actually started when one of the volunteers at the bus museum wondered what was in Shed 47. And when they opened up the doors, they found the only surviving bit of railway track, which goes inside there over a pit, which is now today actually got a locomotive on that they're working on, which is really beautiful that the actual locomotive shed from back in the day when this was working is still in use as the railway shed now. Shed 47 was the locomotive shed. And Shed 47 remains the locomotive shed for today. Everything else that you see on site has been brought in and built by the volunteers, and I must stress it's a very small and dedicated team of volunteers that are working here to bring this all back. And they have recreated a wonderful little light railway, which really helps capture the feelings of a small industrial railway and help tell some of that important history of what the railway here would have done. This is Hunslet number 9045 of 1981, which means it is the same age as my Dennis RS fire engine. And frankly, I think we can tell which of the two has weathered the years better. This looks in exceptionally nice condition, wearing a pseudo British Railway livery. They never carried this livery. They were never owned by British Railway, nor do they run on the network. In fact, they should all be in this yellow colour as its sister. This one is MOD 250 and its sister is MOD 251. And so the British Railway number has been given and made up to be D250, which kind of works. And it just helps with two engines which are of the same type and sisters. The railway took the decision to paint them up in separate colours to help differentiate them to the general public, so they knew there was a green one and a yellow one rather than two of the same things. It makes it seem like they're different to, you know, little kids and things. The history of this one is a little bit hazy at best. We think that it went with the MOD down to Gosport and worked there for a number of years, and then at some point it was shipped off to Singapore to help build the mass transport system over there. And as a result of that, it has these interesting cutouts in the front of the buffer beam, which was presumably for some kind of gauging issue that it had. It was during this time, or before it went, that it was taken into the hands of the Yorkshire Engine Company, who put their own stamp on the side of it and kind of claimed it as their own locomotive. Not really sure the relationship between them and the MOD, whether they were doing it on behalf of the MOD or the MOD leased it to them, or not really sure why or how it ended up. But by 1995 it was back in the UK and went off to Rosyth Dockyard, which was working for the Royal Navy, and that was managed by Babcock International. This one and its sister replaced 2 planets which were deemed too small for the traffic, and the 2 planets went down to Gosport doing a swap, and these 2 went to Rosyth. Pretty much immediately, as soon as these turned up, the rail traffic just ended. Almost overnight. It went from being a busy rail connection to nothing. Now this may have been because the Speedlink freight service, the kind of basic pickup goods service, ended at the same time. And these, as a result, didn't do a single day's work on the docks. Yeah, they went there and did nothing. And from 95 until 2007, it sat around on the dockyard. It wasn't used. People who visited, whether on rail tours or just kind of managed to get in to have a nose around, reported that it had moved position, it had been shunted about, but as far as everybody's aware, it didn't actually run. It just got moved. The condition of the batteries on this one and its sister, when they arrived here, kind of indicated that they hadn't been used in a very long time, because they were very, very old and very knackered batteries. So it did nothing, wasn't used, wasn't loved. And eventually Babcock International, who ran the port, went, what a waste of time it is having these big pieces of metal. They're worth something to scrap, let's scrap them. At which point the lovely guys here thought, we could do with some more locomotives, and what a lovely thing it would be to rescue these, and what a shame it would be for them to go to scrap. And so they approached them with a kind of line along the lines of, we'd like these engines not to go to scrap, can we have them? And more or less what happened was Babcock said, yes, come take them away. So they did, and they turned up here at Shed 47 and needed pretty much nothing to get them going. One even came with a full tank of diesel. I mean, very old diesel by this point, but it was a tank full of diesel, and we all know when buying vehicles, that's a bargain. One of the first things they did when they got it here was to add the shed plate here, 62C, which is Dunfermline shed, which is about 5-6 miles down the road. It's the closest big shed, just in the same way that my engine has the 32B shed for Ipswich. It's the same kind of thing, just having it at its local shed. She is of the standard Hunslet design and weighs about 30 tonnes, with her 2 axles giving us about a 15-tonne axle load. And this is basically Hunslet's standard design for a diesel shunter. Something quite powerful, relatively lightweight in decent engine terms, and able to go basically anywhere. And it's a very distinctive design and easily recognisable. We have the bonnet behind me, a almost centrally mounted cab, and the bonnet behind that that's got the fuel and our air tanks in it. I really do like how thick the frames are on this. It's got kind of almost a comedic feel. The wheels look maybe a little small in comparison to the rest of it, but they are just quite almost diminutive locomotives. They've got a very nice profile to them. The other notable feature about this locomotive are these, which are winch points, so you can pick the whole thing up and move it. Gives you an idea of the whole weight of it with the sheer scale of the things. This one does have some added extras, particularly on the exhaust. It has a flame-proof exhaust. Because it was again working for the Navy, there was the chance that it'd be working with flammable and explosive materials. So the dome that surrounds the exhaust hides a series of cup-like structures which would help trap any possible sparks that would leave with the exhaust when you're revving the engine. The transmission for this one comes through a hydraulic drive, which does mean for shunting purposes that it will be fantastic, because you can really control how slow you creep with it. The engine in this, coupled with its hydraulic transmission, means that it will shift on the level something around 750 tonnes, which is actually pretty decent. On which note, let's go and have a look at the power plant. Opening this up, we see the power plant for this thing, which is a Cummins unit of some specification, which we don't really know. At the railway go, it's definitely a Cummins. Originally, this thing used to generate 250 horsepower, but in recent days, they've downgraded it, and so it now runs around 240. Things that we can see on the side are the compressor for generating the air, because again, it is an air brake locomotive, and that's frankly all I can tell you about this thing, apart from that it's mated to one hell of a hydraulic drive behind it. With that looked at in great detail, I think it's time to get out of the rain and go investigate the cab. Now, we've been on quite a few locomotives now on Lawrie Goes Loco, and this is one of the most airy and open cabs that we've had the pleasure to be in. There is plenty of space for me and Matt in here, and because the access to the cab is through these doors at the back, it gives a bit more room that you can walk around either side it's quite nice, and it gives these very nice big side windows which open up in a nice way like that, allowing you to get plenty of visibility and really get your head out of it should you require it, which is quite good. And out of everything I've been in, the visibility on this is really superb, and with the cream inside, it really does make it feel, well, nice and airy, and really fights the claustrophobia of some engines when you're crammed in there. This is a genuinely nice place to be. I'm also sat on this nice little stool which allows you to sit facing this way or to pivot entirely that way. So you can control this thing from the middle quite happily. It's also dual controlled, so you can control from either side. Matt can control it from over there, or I can control from over here. It is one of the newer engines that I've been on, and as a result it has down here a dead man's pedal which must be pressed at all times, otherwise none of this on here will work. Also tucked away on my side, I've got a battery isolator tucked down there, and I've also got the horn which is tucked in there, and it's a slam in there. Moving across onto the controls we have here, we have the throttle, which is this one here. I also do like the fact they've all got this lovely kind of wooden handle on top of it. It's just a really nice little touch. The Locomotive is air brakes, and that's the control for the brake here, just fitted working on the Locomotive, it's not fitted with anything else. And this one here is the reverser. We've got forward in that way and reverse in this way, and these two lights here which will illuminate to let you know which way you're going, yellow being forwards and blue being backwards. Now there doesn't seem to be any actual reason for one being yellow or blue. On the sister Locomotive they have to this over in the shed over there, they're a completely different colour. It just appears that one colour will signify going that way, yellow, and one will be signifying coming back this way, which is blue. Who knows? And then here we have the clutch. So at the moment everything is disengaged because we're sat. But if we do this and push it forward, that will re-engage the drive, and you saw the reverser move there. So we'll just knock that out. It's just a safety thing they do here, is they knock it out of drive when it's sat still. Moving across here, we've got the sanding control here, leading and trailing, so you can push it if we're going that way. We put the sand coming on that side of the wheels, and this way if you want it on this side. So you're making sure you're putting sand down in front of the wheel, so you actually help with your traction. These things here are for the windscreen wipers. So if I twist this, the air will make the windscreen wiper go, which is pretty cool. And they all work on all four across here, which I really like. So if I stand up now, we look at some of the other controls we've got here. So we've got a rev counter here, then we've got the oil pressure and the oil temperature, which are for the torque converter, which is for the hydraulic transmission, and the ammeter gauge here lets us know whether or not the battery is charging. The big wheel here, which looks suspicious like a steering wheel, is actually our handbrake, slap bang in the middle of it. And then across here as well, we have the speed gauge here, which is one of these interesting ones that goes either way for direction. So forwards will be, I think, that way, and reverse that way. And then we have our air tanks reservoir here with two needles on it showing us both our reservoir and what we're actually applying. Of course, we have water temperature here and our lubrication pressure for the engine. Coming back to the center, we have a series of warning lights. So that's if we get too hot, that's if we've got low oil pressure, that's if the hydraulic transmission's got too hot, and that's if the battery's not working. Because this is a more modern locomotive, if it has any errors across here, it will shut itself down, which is quite useful. However, this can prove to be a slight issue, particularly when starting. When you start an engine, there is no oil pressure. So the sensor will detect no oil pressure and immediately turn the engine off. So we have this switch here, which is an override. So when you start the engine, you hold the override until the low oil pressure light goes off, in which time you can then release it and it should run normally. Unlike any other locomotive I've ever driven, this one has got a key which turns it on, and then you just turn it off and that will shut down the engine. There's no pull stop or anything on this, it's just simple electronic ignition, on, off, like you would on anything else. And then laid across the bottom here, we have the nice things which are all the lights and other controls. The really cool thing about this is we have a setting here called auto. Pushing the lights down into the auto position mean that it's tied into the reverser. So if we're going forwards, I'll have a white light on the front and a red light on the rear. And if we change into reverse, they'll automatically turn over, which is really cool and something I've never come across on an engine we've reviewed so far. We've also got things like the cab light, the cab heater, and that's cool because it's got basically radiators in here. Like down here, we've got a little radiator vents, and down in the front as well, meaning that when it gets slightly less inclement with the weather here, which it can do in Scotland, you can keep the cab nice and warm, which is a real nice touch for keeping your crews happy. And with that, the only other thing is under here, is where we've got all the electronics, which we're not going to touch, and also the pneumatic controls, which are translate all what we do here into actual drive. So what it is actually really, really quite nice. It's one of the nicer cabs that I've been in on a diesel locomotive. And the only other control to talk about is the radio. This has been added in, and this is how they communicate and operate their trains safely at the railway, by communication and reaching a clear understanding of what's about to happen before it happens. And with all of that looked at and a vague idea of what we're going to do, the next stage is to go and prep this, and then we're going to take it out and see what it's like to drive. As one of the most modern locomotives that we featured yet on the channel, this one had moved on with the times to make things a lot easier for the crews. For prepping, for instance, the main thing we need to do is open up the little tubs here, which are spring loaded to keep moisture out, and just pour some oil in, just like that. Fill the little tub up, and then come over here and fill that one up. And we could, if we're doing this properly, just take the trimming out and then refill it and just make sure the trimming is in good condition and that's all travelling down it. But I've been told I don't need to. The axles are self-contained, it's on roller bearings, and so there's nothing else I need to do, and I don't even need to do the hangers for the brakes because they're all greased, so that's not part of your daily start. And that concludes the oiling up down here. The only other thing I need to do is clamber up the quite easy to get to side, got handles and steps, and look inside the engine bay. So, conveniently placed handles make it very easy to clamber up. And then twist that like so, and pull the other one out. This is one of the biggest problems of the locomotive, is if you actually need to do any work on the engine, you need to take the doors off, because it's now quite restricted, having these lovely guardrails that stop me falling off and falling to my death, but it does rather restrict access in and out of here. I do, however, this side have a lovely toolbox, which makes it very pleasant to sit on. And right down here in front of me, we have the oil dipstick. And we can see from that, it is absolutely full of the black liquid stuff. And that's a good start. The only other thing we need to do whilst we're in here is a quick look forward to the belts here that run the alternator, and this side here that run the compressor, and just make sure that they're tight and not about to fall apart, and that the general condition's okay. And that concludes the prep work inside the engine bay. The last thing to check is to clamber up just here, pull this off like so, and have a gander inside to see if there's any coolant, which is I see. Yep, full of coolant, graceful as ever. And with that, we're ready to start it and go for a run. En route to climbing back up to go in the back doors for the cab, we pass the fuel gauge, which is this big thing here. And so it's a fairly clear indicator of I have diesel and I can do what I need to do, or I need to go find diesel. And at the moment, we're pretty full of diesel. And that's a good start. So, time to get started. Right, so here we go. First stage, put your foot on the dead man's pedal, and you can hear air rushing in as it takes off the emergency brake. Next stage before we go is to put the clutch back in, and now pull the lever back until the lights change. At which point, things get a bit weird. We give it a blast of the horn, and we drop the brake. Nice and gently with the brake off. And as soon as the brake's released, this thing starts to crawl forward on its own, which is quite weird because I was expecting it not to. Then slowly opening up the throttle. There we go. What's quite strange driving something like this is there's a delay between opening the throttle, the engine making noise, and getting forward momentum. That's kind of weird. So we open it up a little bit more, and it is a wonderfully smooth transmission. Possibly the smoothest I have ever driven out of anything. It's really quite wonderful. And the engine also sounds absolutely silky smooth. It's really quite something, this. And remarkably easy to drive. I can control everything from a single finger. It's just so nice. In fact, it's probably the easiest to control and most pleasant diesel I have ever been in. The visibility out of all of this cab is superb. I feel very much in control, and having the narrow bonnet and the steps that cut away allow me to see my buffers at both ends, which makes buffering up to things absolute joy and super easy.
Very small wheelbase. It's come on to straight here, it goes a little. When it goes round, and if it was tight up against that, it might be enough to get the sound.
One thing that I am surprised about is just the noise levels in here. It's surprisingly quiet for a small diesel shunter. Even when you open it up, it's nowhere near anything like aggressively loud. It's a rather sedate and pleasant machine to operate. It's a machine that you really do feel that you could operate for days on end and not really feel the downsides, like feel tired or feel stressed out by it. It's genuinely just very pleasant. And now, as we bring ourselves down to the end of the line here, drop the throttle a little and allow it to coast up to a halt. It's just time to apply the brakes, which are absolutely superb. Pulling this on and we will stop just on a dime, to use an American expression. Knocking it back into forward gear, check everything's clear, blast of the horn. I can see my automatic lights have come on from the reflection in the brake van ahead, and forward we go. It is quite an advanced piece of kit, this. And without doubt, it is the easiest and possibly one of the most rewarding locomotives I've had to drive, because it's just nice. There's no struggle, nothing here doesn't work, everything works as it should. It's just nice, simple, and fairly reliable, as the railway informed me. And to think as well, I'm moving a single 20-ton brake van, and we are hardly breaking sweat, because it will move, I think said earlier, something like 750 tons. And I would love to do a proper train with it and hear it really work, because it's not bothered by this at all. It's built to be a heavy shunter and really move some stuff around. As it is, it's great. And you know what? It's so nice to drive something that has mod cons like working windscreen wipers and seats. Seats are good too. The other thing that's worth noting is if I suddenly fall down dead and stop using the dead man's pedal like this, everything very quickly comes to a stop. That's it. Which is an amazing safety thing to have, is this dead man's pedal. And now by depressing it, the brakes will now release and we are free to slowly pull ourselves away. gives such an immense kind of just sense of, not really power, because the engine, while low torque, doesn't really scream at you, but the way that it takes up gives this sense that it's got a lot of power in reserve. Some things are very shouty and you go, oh yes, whereas this thing's so smooth, it's kind of deceptive. It's a very, very well engineered piece of kit. Coming round here, there is a slight gradient on the line, so I do have to open it up a tiny bit, which is actually really nice, and we hear that engine roar a little bit more. But what an exceptional piece of kit. And for the railway, it's a very useful locomotive. It's useful for shunting and moving their stock around, and also running their passenger service with the brake van that we've got out today. And it's something that is a basic all-rounder. It does absolutely everything they need here. Also has a rather exceptionally nice horn, which I am very much enjoying. The ride in here, well, for a little two-axle locomotive, four-wheel locomotive, it rides over the track here very well. I mean, the track here seems to be pretty well aired and pretty nice, but it seems to just glide over it. Some four-wheeled locomotives I've driven in the past, you can really feel them kicking up and down, but the suspension and the system on this, it's lovely. It's really, really good. I mean, we often talk about how things glide over the rails, but this really does. And for an industrial, that's genuinely impressive. It's an amazing little piece of engineering. The other big and important thing to remember with this locomotive is it's practically brand new. It's done so little compared to everything else that I've driven so far in Lawrie Goes Loco. It worked for a dock for a couple of years, it went to Singapore, and then it sat around. And it's an incredibly low amount. I mean, the Railway Society think it's basically new, and the engine sounds like new, the transmission feels like new. It's remarkable. It's a remarkable survivor, and what an amazing thing for the railway here to have saved it, because what a travesty a basically new engine would have been to being cut up. They bought both the two engines here, thinking that one of them would end up being a donor to keep the other one going. They never expected both engines to be in use. It's just quite an incredible thing to pick up two engines that haven't been used for God knows how many years and find out that they both work. What an amazing thing that is. And then to have them both being, well, remarkably useful pieces of kit. And with this one and its sister, it's wonderful to have two engines that work together during their working lives, reunited in preservation, still basically doing what they used to do. Offering rides, working things around, just shunting wagons around. And also, what's particularly appropriate is working on a site that served the Navy. They're still working on an ex-MOD site, moving wagons around, which is basically perfect. They are super. Also absolutely magnificent to drive a locomotive which doesn't need anything doing to it, that you know this is as tip-top condition that it was when it was new. That's quite fantastic. Something that hasn't had to be overhauled, something that hasn't had to be rebuilt, something that's merely had the cosmetics done and now can be maintained. This engine really is a credit to the railway. It's superb. And really, it's perfect. Absolutely perfect. It certainly isn't as guttural as some of the things I've driven, but it has it's a nice tone to it. It really does. There's a couple of things on it that are straight bits weird. There's a clicking over there that's, I think, something to do with the air, but it's working, that's the main thing. And everything, even the brakes have this just beautiful feel to them. It's so controllable. Certainly one of the most controllable locomotives I've ever had the pleasure to drive. And I love this, the auto start feature. Anybody who's a passenger behind you will think that you are a pro driver from literally just dumping the brake. It's wonderful. It starts rolling. And then with the brake and this, because there's no transmission as such to slip, it's hydrostatic, it's always kind of slipping. It means you can roll up to things beautifully. It is a perfect shunting locomotive. It's a good all-rounder. It will never do it here. This thing is theoretically capable of doing somewhere around 20, which would be quite interesting, because you do get a sense of being quite high up because it's a short wheelbase and a short locomotive with a relatively high cab. You get a similar feeling driving this that you do with my own 48. It feels quite short. That said, being in the middle for operations is really pleasant. You are able to gauge your distance between what you're moving onto quite nicely. It's not like some things that you will have to, like a standard steam engine, where you have a vague idea of how much is in front of you. It's all just laid out well, and wonderfully for being able to sit down like this. I've got a lovely window here to stick my head out so I can see a bit more. The windows slide nicely. The angle here, foot on that. Everything's just within easy reach. It was really designed with ergonomics in mind, which, like some early engines, wasn't really a factor, particularly things on the Great Western where you have a brake over here and the regulator over there. This thing is designed for one man to be able to sit in it and run it quite happily. I'll take it back, it does sound really good when you give it a bit. It has a much more modern sound than a lot of other engines that I've driven so far, and that's because it's a much newer engine with a much more kind of modern thrashing noise rather than an individual cylinder chug. Oh boy, what a piece of kit. It's probably now more useful and more valued as a locomotive than it ever was in its original life. That's a really nice thing, something that's now earning its keep after so many years in its real life doing nothing. Having finished testing the pulling power of the Hunslet by moving around a single brake van, the railway decided that they had one more treat in store for me. So that brings us to the end of this video, looking at this basically brand new locomotive. It is, without any shadow of a doubt, the most least used locomotive that I have ever featured on the channel. And it is something that actually genuinely does feel new. There's lots of engines that I've been on before which are fresh from overhaul and feel like they're fresh out of the box, but this one still almost has that kind of that new train smell, if you like. It really does feel like a locomotive that's never been taxed. It feels like nothing of it has ever been really pushed to its full potential, because really, unless it did something in Singapore which was particularly hard work, I don't think it's ever really had a hard day's work in its entire life. Sure, it's had days where it's been used, but a day where it's actually been thrashed within an inch of its life, I don't think it's ever happened. Certainly if it has, it doesn't show the strains from it, which may just be that it's a well-built Hunslet, but it's proper good. And it's going to keep doing this at Shed 47, well, for many years to come, because it's solid. It's absolutely brilliant. In fact, I've had a wonderful day driving it because it's just a dream. It's honestly one of the easiest engines to drive, and it's possibly almost, if not easier, than my 48. It's just so simple, and to be able to control everything with a single finger, it's just pleasant. It's just so pleasant and so completely stressless. It's wonderful. So with that, I am going to go for another run. Enjoy the fact that we've actually got some nice weather up here in Scotland. And so a massive thank you to the Shed 47 group for inviting us up here and letting us take the locomotive out. If you really like the railway and you want some more information about it, the website is in the video description. And if you really like the look of the place and you like the look of the engine and you think, I'd like to get involved and learn to drive it, then the contact details for coming to volunteer also in the video description. So thanks a lot for watching, guys, and we'll see you next time. If you have enjoyed it, remember, give us a like, give the video a share, and leave a comment. What do you think of this thing? Do you know of any other engines around which are in better nick than this? Let us know. And if you have enjoyed this, how about clicking over there for another ex-MOD engine we did over at Chatham, or down there for the real MOD, the First World War locomotive we did at narrow gauge simplex on the First World War railway. Thanks for watching, guys. We'll see you next time.